Man laughs at homeless veteran, then realizes his true identity. Bradley Stone's polished leather shoes clicked against the sidewalk as he strode purposefully towards his favorite cafe. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of success, or so he imagined. At 45, Bradley was the very picture of achievement. Impeccably tailored suit hugging his trim frame, salt and pepper hair artfully styled, and a confident smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. Today, that smirk was particularly pronounced. Bradley had just closed a deal that would cement his company's position at the top of the industry food chain. It was the kind of victory that made him feel invincible, reinforcing his long-held belief that success was a matter of personal responsibility and nothing else. As he pushed open the door to Café Lumiere, the barista greeted him by name. "The usual, Mr. Stone?" Bradley nodded, barely glancing at her as he fished out his wallet. "Make it a double shot today, Cindy. I'm celebrating." He settled into his favorite corner table, the one with the best view of both the street and the cafe's interior. It was a vantage point from which he could observe the world while remaining above it all. The espresso arrived promptly, its rich aroma mingling with the underlying scent of wealth and privilege that seemed to permeate the establishment. As Bradley savored his first sip, movement outside the window caught his eye. A man, clothed in layers of tattered garments, was slowly making his way down the sidewalk. His weathered face bore the marks of a hard life, and his gait suggested years of carrying an invisible burden. Bradley watched with a mixture of curiosity and revulsion as the man paused near the cafe's entrance. The homeless man, unaware of Bradley's scrutiny, approached a young couple exiting the cafe. "Excuse me," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "Could you spare some change for a veteran down on his luck?" The couple murmured apologies and hurried away, leaving the man standing alone on the sidewalk. For a moment, his shoulders sagged, but then he straightened up and turned towards the cafe window. It was then that Bradley got a clear look at the man's face. Despite the dirt and the unkempt beard, there was something in those eyes, a flicker of dignity, perhaps, or a ghost of pride long buried. The man's gaze swept across the cafe interior, eventually landing on Bradley. Their eyes met, and for a fraction of a second, something passed between them, a flash of recognition so brief that Bradley dismissed it almost immediately. The homeless man hesitated, then approached the window where Bradley sat. "Sir," he began, his voice muffled through the glass, "I hate to bother you, but I'm a veteran and I've fallen on hard times. Any help would be." Bradley's lip curled in disgust. He'd heard it all before, the sob stories, the claims of military service, the pleas for help. In his mind, they were all the same, lazy individuals looking for handouts instead of pulling themselves up by their bootstraps. "Get a job," Bradley sneered loudly, his voice carrying through the cafe. Several patrons turned to look, some with shock, others with uncomfortable amusement. "If you want money, earn it like the rest of us." The homeless man didn't react to the taunt, but something in his eyes changed, a flicker of recognition, perhaps, or a shadow of a memory. Bradley, caught up in his own sense of superiority, failed to notice. With an exaggerated sigh, Bradley reached into his pocket and pulled out a crisp dollar bill. He made a show of smoothing it out before holding it up to the window. "Here," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "This is probably more than you've seen all week. Don't spend it all in one place." He flicked the bill towards the door, where it fluttered to the ground just inside the cafe's entrance. The homeless man watched it fall, his expression unreadable. For a moment he stood there, his eyes locked with Bradley's. In that gaze was a depth of experience that Bradley couldn't begin to fathom, years of struggle, sacrifice, and resilience that far outweighed the value of that discarded dollar. Without a word, the man turned and walked away, leaving the money where it had fallen. Bradley watched him go, a strange unease settling in his stomach. He tried to shake it off, attributing the feeling to the extra shot of espresso. As the day wore on, Bradley found himself unable to completely forget the encounter. The man's eyes haunted him. There was something familiar about them, something he couldn't quite place. But each time the thought surfaced, Bradley pushed it away, burying it beneath layers of self-assurance and the intoxicating glow of his recent success. By the time he left the cafe, the incident had been relegated to the back of his mind, just another forgettable interaction in a city full of nameless faces. Bradley Stone walked back to his office, his head high, his step confident. He had a company to run, deals to close, and a fortune to build. The world was his oyster, and he had no time for those who couldn't keep up. Little did he know that this chance encounter would be the first tremor in an earthquake that was about to shake the very foundations of his carefully constructed world. The gentle hum of the elevator ascending to the penthouse floor was a stark contrast to the tumultuous thoughts swirling in Bradley Stone's mind. The day's triumph, closing the biggest deal of his career, should have left him elated. Instead, an inexplicable unease had taken root, growing stronger with each passing hour. As the elevator door slid open, revealing the marble foyer of his luxurious apartment, Bradley loosened his tie and made a beeline for the bar. The amber liquid sloshed into the crystal tumbler, promising temporary relief from the nagging discomfort that had plagued him since his encounter with the homeless man. Bradley sank into the plush leather armchair, facing the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city sprawled before him, a glittering tapestry of lights and shadows. It was a view he had earned, a testament to his hard work and determination. So, why did it suddenly feel hollow? He took a long sip of whiskey, savoring the burn as it slid down his throat. The familiar warmth spread through his chest, but instead of comfort, it brought with it a flood of memories he had long tried to suppress. The glass clinked against the side table as Bradley set it down with trembling hands. He closed his eyes, but the darkness behind his eyelids transformed into another scene entirely, one of dust, chaos, and terror. Suddenly, he was no longer Bradley Stone, the successful businessman. He was Private Stone, a young Marine crouched in a trench, the acrid smell of gunpowder filling his nostrils. The rhythmic thud of artillery fire in the distance mixed with the staccato burst of nearby gunfire. His heart raced, palms sweaty against the grip of his rifle. It had been years since Bradley had allowed himself to remember that day. The battle that had nearly claimed his life, the moment that had changed everything. He had buried it deep, along with the guilt, the fear, and the debt he could never repay. In his mind's eye, he saw the chaos unfold once more. Their unit had been ambushed, caught in a deadly crossfire. Men he had trained with, joked with, shared dreams of home with, fell around him. The air was thick with dust and the metallic tang of blood. Bradley remembered the searing pain as a bullet tore through his leg, the world tilting sideways as he fell. He could still hear the shouts of his fellow Marines, the thunderous explosions drowning out his own screams of agony. As his vision blurred, he had been certain that this foreign soil would be his final resting place. But then, through the haze of pain and fear, a face appeared. A fellow Marine, his features obscured by grime and sweat, reached out to him. Despite the hellfire raining down around them, this man, this hero, had risked everything to save him. "I've got you, Stone," the Marine had shouted over the din of battle. "We're getting out of here." With strength that seemed superhuman, the soldier had hoisted Bradley onto his shoulders and begun the treacherous journey back to safety. Bullets whizzed past them, explosions rocked the earth, but the man never faltered. Step by agonizing step, he had carried Bradley away from certain death. In the relative safety of the medical tent, as medics worked frantically to save his leg, Bradley had tried to thank his savior. But the man had already disappeared, called back to the front lines. In the chaos that followed, the surgeries, the long recovery, the eventual discharge, Bradley never got the chance to properly express his gratitude. All he had was a name, Morrison. Back in his penthouse, Bradley's eyes snapped open. The city lights blurred as he blinked away unexpected tears. He reached for the whiskey again, downing it in one gulp, trying to drown the surge of emotions threatening to overwhelm him. What had happened to Morrison after the war? Bradley had made half-hearted attempts to find out over the years, but life, his relentless pursuit of success, had always gotten in the way. Eventually, he had convinced himself that Morrison had probably died in combat, like so many others. It was easier that way, easier than facing the possibility that the man who had saved his life might still be out there somewhere. But now, unbidden, the image of Morrison's face began to blur with that of the homeless veteran he had encountered earlier. The same weathered features, the same haunted look in the eyes. Bradley shook his head violently, trying to dispel the notion. It was impossible. A coincidence, nothing more. Yet the seed of doubt had been planted. What if?
No.
Bradley stood abruptly, his legs unsteady. He couldn't allow himself to entertain such thoughts. He was Bradley Stone, self-made millionaire, not some sentimental fool dwelling on the past. He had worked hard to build his empire, to become the man he was today. He couldn't let one chance encounter with a street beggar unravel everything. As he prepared for bed, Bradley tried to focus on the future, the deals to be made, the empire to expand. But as he drifted off to sleep, his dreams were filled with the sounds of battle, the face of a nameless hero, and the haunting eyes of a man he had carelessly dismissed. Little did Bradley know that this night of restless sleep was just the beginning. The carefully constructed walls he had built around his past were starting to crumble, and the foundations of his present were about to be shaken to their very core. The morning sun filtered through the blinds of Bradley Stone's corner office, casting long shadows across the polished mahogany desk. On any other day, this would have been the moment Bradley savored most. The quiet before the storm of business, the calm before he conquered yet another challenge in the corporate world. Today, however, the silence felt oppressive, laden with an inexplicable sense of foreboding. Bradley's fingers drummed an erratic rhythm on the arm of his leather chair as he stared at the cityscape beyond his window. The previous night's dreams still clung to him like a shroud, fragments of memories he'd long suppressed flickering at the edges of his consciousness. He shook his head, trying to dispel the lingering unease. There was work to be done, deals to close. He couldn't afford distractions. A soft knock at the door interrupted his reverie. "Come in," he called, his voice gruffer than intended. His assistant, Sarah, entered, her usual cheerful demeanor noticeably subdued. "Mr. Stone," she began, hesitation evident in her tone, "I'm afraid I have some concerning news." Bradley's spine stiffened. "What is it, Sarah? Spit it out." Sarah took a deep breath. "It's about the Meridian deal, sir. There have been complications." The words hit Bradley like a physical blow. The Meridian deal, the crown jewel of his recent achievements, the contract that was supposed to cement his company's dominance in the market. "What kind of complications?" he demanded, rising from his chair. "The client, they're backing out," Sarah explained, her words tumbling out in a rush. "There are rumors of financial irregularities, possible legal issues. Nothing certain yet, but they're distancing themselves from all new partnerships." Bradley's mind raced. This couldn't be happening. Not now, not when he was so close to achieving everything he'd ever wanted. "And our investors?" he asked, dreading the answer. Sarah's gaze dropped to the floor. "They're getting nervous, sir. Some are already talking about pulling out." The room seemed to tilt sideways. Bradley gripped the edge of his desk, his knuckles turning white. "Get me on the phone with Meridian CEO," he ordered, "and set up an emergency meeting with the board. We need to get ahead of this." As Sarah hurried out, Bradley sank back into his chair, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. How had things unraveled so quickly? Just yesterday, he had been on top of the world, untouchable. Now, it all felt like a house of cards on the verge of collapse. The hours that followed were a blur of frantic phone calls, tense meetings, and desperate attempts to salvage the situation. But with each passing moment, the gravity of the crisis became more apparent. The Meridian deal was beyond saving, and the ripple effects were spreading rapidly. Investors were panicking, partners were distancing themselves, and the vultures of the business world were already circling, sensing blood in the water. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across his now empty office, Bradley found himself alone with his thoughts once more. The day's events had left him drained, both physically and emotionally. But it wasn't just the impending business disaster that weighed on him. Throughout the chaos, his mind had kept returning to the dreams that had plagued him the night before. To Morrison, the man who had saved his life all those years ago.
Why now?
Why, in the midst of the biggest crisis of his career, was he haunted by ghosts from his past? Bradley loosened his tie, feeling suffocated. He needed air, needed to clear his head. Without really thinking about it, he found himself heading towards the elevator, then out onto the bustling city streets. His feet carried him, almost of their own accord, back to the café where he had encountered the homeless veteran the day before. As he approached, his heart rate quickened. There, in the same spot as yesterday, sat the man who had unwittingly triggered this flood of memories and emotions. Bradley hesitated, torn between the urge to flee and an inexplicable compulsion to approach. The rational part of his mind screamed at him to turn around, to focus on saving his company, his life's work. But something deeper, something he couldn't quite name, propelled him forward. "Excuse me," Bradley said, his voice lacking its usual confidence. The homeless man looked up, surprise flickering across his weathered features. There was no anger in his eyes, no resentment for yesterday's humiliation, just a quiet curiosity. Bradley shifted uncomfortably, suddenly unsure of what to say. I wanted to apologize for yesterday. My behavior was unacceptable." The man studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Apology accepted," he said, his voice gravelly, but not unkind. Relieved, Bradley reached for his wallet. "Please, let me make it up to you." "I can." But the man held up a hand, stopping him. "Keep your money," he said softly. "That's not why I'm here." Bradley frowned, confused. "Then why?" The man's eyes met his, and in them, Bradley saw a depth of experience and understanding that made him feel suddenly small. "You don't recognize me, do you?" the man said quietly, a hint of sadness in his voice. The words sent a chill down Bradley's spine. He stared at the man, trying to place him, to make sense of the nagging feeling that had been plaguing him since their first encounter. But the harder he tried, the more elusive the connection became. "I'm sorry," Bradley said, shaking his head. I'm sure we've never met before." The man didn't press further, simply nodding as if he had expected this response. "It's all right," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sometimes it's easier not to remember." Bradley stood there, rooted to the spot, a whirlwind of emotions coursing through him. Part of him wanted to demand answers, to shake the man until he explained what he meant. But another part, the part that had spent years burying the past, wanted nothing more than to turn and run. In the end, it was the man who broke the tension. "You should go," he said gently. "You look like you have a lot on your mind." Bradley nodded numbly, taking a step back. Yes, I should. Thank you for your understanding." As he turned to leave, Bradley couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking away from something important, something that could change everything. But the weight of his current problems, the collapsing deal, the nervous investors, the looming specter of failure, pulled him back towards the familiar world of boardrooms and balance sheets. The walk back to his office was a blur, the bustling city streets fading into a cacophony of indistinct noise. By the time Bradley reached his building, his mind was racing, torn between the immediate crisis at hand and the enigmatic encounter he'd just had. As he rode the elevator up to his floor, Bradley tried to focus on damage control. He needed to rally his team, to come up with a strategy to salvage what they could of the Meridian deal. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw the weathered face of the homeless man, heard his cryptic words echoing in his mind. The elevator doors opened, and Bradley stepped out, straightening his tie and trying to compose himself. He had a company to save after all. Whatever mystery surrounded the man at the cafe, it would have to wait. But as Bradley walked into his office, he found that compartmentalizing wasn't as easy as it once had been. The carefully constructed walls between his past and present were beginning to crumble, and try as he might, he couldn't ignore the growing suspicion that the two were more intertwined than he'd ever imagined. Sarah met him at the door, a stack of papers in her hand and worry etched on her face. "Mr. Stone, the board is waiting for you in the conference room. They're demanding answers about the Meridian situation." Bradley nodded, taking a deep breath. "Thank you, Sarah. I'll be right there." As he gathered his thoughts, preparing to face the board and fight for the company he'd built, Bradley couldn't shake the feeling that he was standing on the precipice of something monumental. The crisis with Meridian, the mysterious homeless man, the resurfacing memories of his time in the military, it all seemed to be converging, pushing him towards a reckoning he wasn't sure he was ready to face. With one last glance at the city's skyline outside his window, Bradley straightened his shoulders and headed for the conference room. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever secrets the past held, he would face them head-on. After all, that's what Bradley Stone did. He conquered, he persevered, he won. But as he pushed open the conference room door, greeting the grim faces of his board members, a small voice in the back of his mind whispered a troubling question. What if winning wasn't everything? What if the real victory lay in confronting the very past he'd spent a lifetime running from? The door closed behind him, and Bradley Stone stepped into the fray, unaware that this crisis was just the beginning of a journey that would force him to re-examine everything he thought he knew about success, loyalty, and the true of a man's worth. The soft glow of Bradley Stone's laptop screen illuminated his haggard face, casting eerie shadows across the dimly lit study. Outside, the city slept, but sleep eluded Bradley. The clock on his desk silently ticked past 3 a.m., each passing minute a stark reminder of how quickly his world was unraveling. The emergency board meeting had been a disaster. Despite his best efforts to project confidence and control, the stark reality of their situation had been impossible to ignore. The Meridian deal was beyond salvaging, and the repercussions were spreading like wildfire through every aspect of the company. Investors were jumping ship, partners were distancing themselves, and the vultures of the business world were circling, ready to pick apart the empire he'd spent his life building. Bradley rubbed his tired eyes, the weight of impending failure pressing down on him like a physical force. But it wasn't just the business crisis that kept him awake. The encounter with the homeless man outside the cafe continued to nag at him, stirring up memories and emotions he'd long tried to bury. With a frustrated sigh, Bradley pushed away from his desk and walked to the window. The city sprawled before him, a tapestry of twinkling lights and shadowy skyscrapers. He'd always viewed this landscape as a testament to his success, a kingdom he'd conquered through sheer will and determination. Now, it felt more like a mirage, an illusion of power and control that was rapidly fading. Almost without conscious thought, Bradley found himself opening his laptop again. This time, instead of financial reports and damage control strategies, he typed a different query into the search bar: homeless veteran statistics. The results were staggering. Thousands of men and women who had served their country now lived on the streets, battling PTSD, addiction, and a system ill-equipped to help them. Bradley scrolled through article after article, each one painting a grim picture of lives shattered by war and forgotten by society. As he read, faces began to swim before his eyes, not just the nameless statistics in the articles, but men he had known. His old unit, the soldiers he'd fought alongside, laughed with, depended on for survival. What had become of them after the war? How many had fallen through the cracks, ending up like the man outside the cafe? The man. Bradley's fingers hovered over the keyboard as a new thought struck him. Could it be possible? After all these years? With trembling hands, he typed in a new search: Sergeant Jack Morrison, Marines. The results were sparse, mostly old news articles about military operations and casualties. But one link caught his eye, a veteran support group page with a list of names. There, nestled among dozens of others, was the name he'd been searching for: Jack Morrison. Bradley's heart raced as he clicked the link, but his excitement quickly turned to frustration. The page was old, last updated years ago, with no current information on the whereabouts of the men listed. Leaning back in his chair, Bradley closed his eyes, memories washing over him like a flood. The chaos of battle, the searing pain of his injury, and through it all, the unwavering presence of Sergeant Morrison, the man who had carried him to safety, who had risked everything to save his life. A life that Bradley had used to build wealth and power, while Morrison, ended up on the streets? The thought was like a physical blow. Bradley stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. He paced the room, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Guilt, shame, and a growing sense of responsibility warred with a part of him that still clung to his hard-earned success, that whispered that he owed nothing to anyone. In his agitation, Bradley's elbow caught the edge of a bookshelf, sending a small box tumbling to the floor. Its contents spilled out. Old photos, medals, fragments of a past he'd kept hidden away for years. With shaking hands, Bradley knelt to gather the scattered items. Each object was a portal to another time, a faded photograph of his unit, grinning and dirty after a successful mission, a purple heart, its ribbon frayed with age, a creased letter from home that he'd carried through every battle. And there, nestled among the memories, was a photo he'd almost forgotten existed. Bradley lifted it carefully, as if it might crumble to dust in his hands. In the image, two young Marines stood arm in arm, their faces streaked with dirt but split wide with laughter. Bradley recognized his younger self immediately, but it was the other man who held his attention. Sergeant Jack Morrison, the man who had saved his life. The man whose face was etched with the same lines, whose eyes held the same haunted look as the homeless veteran outside the cafe. The realization hit Bradley like a physical blow, driving the air from his lungs. He staggered back, collapsing into his chair, the photo clutched to his chest. It was him. All this time, it had been him, the successful businessman and the homeless veteran, their paths diverging so dramatically after the war, only to intersect again in this moment of crisis. The irony was almost too much to bear. As the first light of dawn began to creep through the windows, Bradley Stone sat motionless, the weight of his past and the uncertainty of his future pressing down on him. The empire he'd built was crumbling around him, but suddenly, it didn't seem to matter as much. For the first time in years, Bradley felt the stirring of something long forgotten, a sense of duty, of loyalty to something greater than himself. The man who had saved his life was out there, lost and alone. And Bradley had walked right past him, too caught up in his own success to even recognize the debt he owed. With a newfound resolve, Bradley stood, carefully placing the photo on his desk. The sun was rising over the city, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold. It was a new day, and with it came a chance for redemption. Bradley Stone had a mission now, one far more important than any business deal or corporate takeover. He had to find Jack Morrison, to make things right. And in doing so, perhaps he would find a part of himself that had been lost along the way. As he prepared to face the day ahead, Bradley couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a chance encounter or a twist of fate. It was an opportunity to repay a debt, to redefine success, and to remember the man he had once been and could be again. The road ahead would be difficult, fraught with challenges both personal and professional. But for the first time in years, Bradley felt a sense of purpose that went beyond the bottom line. Whatever the cost, whatever sacrifices he had to make, he would find Jack Morrison and offer him the help and recognition he deserved. It was time for Bradley Stone to become the kind of man worthy of the second chance he'd been given all those years ago on a distant battlefield. His heart raced with a mixture of anticipation and dread as he made his way towards the cafe where he had last seen Jack. The weight of the photo in his pocket, the one of him and Jack from their Marine days, seemed to grow heavier with each step. But when he arrived at the spot, Jack was nowhere to be seen. Bradley's heart sank, but he refused to give up. He approached a nearby shopkeeper, showing him the old photo of Jack. "Have you seen this man?" Bradley asked, his voice tinged with desperation. "He's been around here recently, homeless." The shopkeeper squinted at the photo, then shook his head. "Sorry, mister. Lots of homeless folks around here. Can't keep track of them all." Undeterred, Bradley spent the next several hours combing the area, showing the photo to anyone who would look, describing Jack to those who wouldn't. He visited shelters, soup kitchens, and veterans outreach centers, leaving his contact information everywhere he went. As the day wore on, Bradley's expensive shoes pinched his feet, and his shirt clung to his back with sweat. The physical discomfort was nothing compared to the emotional toll of his search. Each dead end, each person who couldn't help, felt like a personal failure. It was late afternoon when Bradley, exhausted and disheartened, stumbled upon a small veterans' shelter he had overlooked earlier. The peeling paint and shabby exterior didn't inspire much hope, but he pushed through the door anyway. The interior was dimly lit and sparsely furnished, but clean. A middle-aged woman looked up from a desk cluttered with papers and smiled warmly. "Can I help you?" Bradley approached, pulling out the photo once more. "I'm looking for this man," he said, his voice hoarse from a day of asking the same question. "His name is Jack Morrison. He saved my life once, and I need to find him." The woman's eyes widened as she looked at the photo, then back at Bradley. "You're in luck," she said softly. "Jack's here." Bradley's heart leaped into his throat. "Here? Now?" She nodded, gesturing towards a door at the back of the room. "He's in the common area." "But sir," she added as Bradley made to move past her, "Jack's been through a lot. Please be gentle." Bradley nodded, suddenly unsure of what to say or do. He had spent all day searching for Jack, but now that the moment had arrived, he felt woefully unprepared. Taking a deep breath, he pushed open the door to the common area. The room was small, with a few worn couches and a television playing quietly in the corner. And there, sitting by the window with his back to the door, was a figure Bradley recognized immediately. "Jack," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The man turned, and Bradley found himself face to face with Sergeant Jack Morrison for the first time in decades. The years had not been kind to Jack. His face was weathered, lined with the hardships of a life lived on the streets. But his eyes, those were the same eyes that had looked at Bradley with determination as he carried him to safety all those years ago. Recognition flickered in Jack's gaze. "Stone," he said, his voice a mixture of disbelief and something Bradley couldn't quite identify. "Bradley Stone." Bradley nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. He took a step forward, then another, until he was standing directly in front of Jack. "I've been looking for you," Bradley finally managed to say. I should have looked for you years ago." Jack's expression was unreadable. "Sit down, Stone," he said, gesturing to a nearby chair. "You look like you've had a long day." Bradley sank into the chair, suddenly aware of how exhausted he was. For a moment, neither man spoke. The weight of years, of divergent paths and unspoken words, hung heavy between them. Finally, Bradley broke the silence. "Jack, I don't even know where to begin. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for not recognizing you at the cafe, for how I treated you, and for not finding you sooner. You saved my life, and I just went on with mine without a second thought." Jack listened silently, his eyes never leaving Bradley's face. When Bradley finished, Jack leaned back in his chair with a heavy sigh. "You don't owe me anything, Stone. We were soldiers. We looked out for each other. That's what we did." "But after the war," Bradley pressed on. "What happened? How did you?" He trailed off, unsure how to ask about the circumstances that had led Jack to homelessness. A shadow passed over Jack's face. "Life happened, Stone. PTSD, nightmares, couldn't hold down a job. One thing led to another, and well..." He gestured vaguely at himself and their surroundings. "Here we are." The casual way Jack described his downfall hit Bradley like a punch to the gut. While he had been climbing the corporate ladder, amassing wealth and power, the man who had saved his life had been fighting a daily battle for survival. "I want to help," Bradley blurted out. "Whatever you need, money, a place to stay, job training, anything." Jack's eyes hardened. "I don't want your charity, Stone. I've managed this long on my own." "It's not charity," Bradley insisted. It's what I owe you. What I owe myself, really. The man I should have been all along." For a long moment, Jack said nothing. Then, slowly, a ghost of a smile appeared on his weathered face. "You've changed, Stone. The Bradley I knew wouldn't have been caught dead in a place like this." Bradley laughed, a sound of both amusement and regret. "Yeah, well, turns out the Bradley you knew had a lot to learn." As the two men continued to talk, the years between them seemed to melt away. They spoke of their time in the Marines, of the battles they'd fought together, and of the very different wars they'd waged since coming home. Bradley learned of Jack's struggles with PTSD, of the nightmares that still plagued him, of the system that had failed him at every turn. And Jack listened as Bradley confessed his own battles, not with poverty or homelessness, but with the emptiness that his pursuit of wealth and status had left in its wake. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the small room, Bradley realized that he had found more than just the man he'd been searching for. He had found a piece of himself that had been lost for far too long. "Jack," he said as their conversation lulled, "I meant what I said about helping. But I understand if you don't want to accept it. Just, please, let me do something. Anything." Jack was quiet for a moment, his eyes distant. Then he turned to Bradley with a look of determination that was achingly familiar. "You want to help? Really help?" Bradley nodded eagerly. "Anything." "Then help me help others," Jack said. "There are thousands of vets out there like me, Stone. They need more than just one man's charity. They need a chance, a system that doesn't forget them the moment they take off the uniform." As Jack spoke, Bradley felt something shift inside him. The drive that had once been focused solely on his own success now found a new purpose. He saw not just Jack before him, but all the men and women who had served their country only to be left behind. "Okay," Bradley said, a new resolve in his voice. "Let's do it. Together." As they shook hands, sealing a pact that would change both their lives and the lives of countless others, Bradley Stone realized that he had finally found the missing piece in his life. It wasn't in the boardrooms or the balance sheets, but here, in this small shelter, with a man who had once saved his life and was now, in a different way, saving it again. The road ahead would be challenging, fraught with obstacles both personal and societal. But as Bradley left the shelter that evening, with plans to meet Jack again the next day, he felt a sense of purpose and fulfillment that no business deal had ever provided. He had set out to repay a debt, to right a wrong from his past. Instead, he had found a new mission, a chance to redefine success and to become the man he was always meant to be. And for the first time in years, Bradley Stone walked the city streets not as a conqueror, but as a man humbled, inspired, and ready to make a real difference in the world. The weeks following Bradley Stone's reunion with Jack Morrison were a whirlwind of activity, marked by late nights, endless meetings, and a profound shift in Bradley's priorities. The corporate world that had once been his entire focus now took a backseat to a new mission, making a real difference in the lives of veterans. Bradley's first order of business was to leverage his considerable resources and connections to support the shelter where he had found Jack. He didn't just write a check, though he did that too, but rolled up his sleeves and got involved. He spent weekends painting walls, fixing plumbing, and upgrading the shelter's facilities. The sight of Bradley Stone, once known for his tailored suits and corner office, now dressed in old jeans and a paint-splattered t-shirt, became a common one at the shelter. It was during one of these weekends that Jack approached him, a look of amused disbelief on his weathered face. "You know, Stone," Jack said, leaning against a freshly painted wall, "when you said you wanted to help, I didn't think you meant like this." Bradley wiped sweat from his brow, leaving a smear of blue paint across his forehead. "Honestly, neither did I. But it feels right, you know?" Jack nodded, a ghost of a smile playing at his lips. "Yeah, I know." As they worked side by side, Bradley and Jack's friendship deepened. They shared stories of their time in the Marines, filled in the gaps of the years they'd spent apart, and talked about their hopes for the future. Bradley found himself continually amazed by Jack's resilience, his unwavering desire to help others despite his own hardships. It was during one of these conversations that the idea first took root. They were discussing the challenges faced by veterans transitioning back to civilian life when Jack made an offhand comment that would change everything. "You know what these guys really need?" Jack said, gesturing to the other veterans at the shelter. "A chance. Not just charity, but an opportunity to prove themselves, to use the skills they learned in the service." Bradley's mind began to race. What if we could give them that chance, he mused. What if we could create a program that doesn't just provide temporary support, but actually helps veterans build sustainable careers? The idea grew rapidly from there. Bradley threw himself into research, consulting with experts in veteran affairs, employment specialists, and mental health professionals. He reached out to his business contacts, pitching the idea of a comprehensive program that would provide job training, mental health support, and employment opportunities specifically tailored for veterans. The response was overwhelming. Companies that had once seen Bradley as just another cutthroat CEO now saw a man on a mission, and they wanted to be part of it. Offers of support poured in, promises of internships, job placements, and funding for training programs. But Bradley knew that for this to work, it needed to be more than just a charitable endeavor. It needed to be a sustainable, long-term solution. And for that, he realized he needed to fundamentally restructure his own company. The board meeting where Bradley presented his plan was tense. He proposed shifting a significant portion of the company's resources towards the veteran program, integrating it into the core of their business model. Some board members were skeptical, worried about the impact on their bottom line. But as Bradley spoke, his passion evident in every word, the mood in the room began to shift. He painted a vision of a company that didn't just make profits, but made a difference, a company that valued the unique skills and experiences that veterans brought to the table. "Gentlemen," Bradley concluded, his voice firm with conviction, "I'm not asking you to choose between doing good and doing well. I'm showing you how we can do both." The vote was unanimous. Bradley's company would become a pioneer in veteran employment and support, setting a new standard for corporate social responsibility. As the program took shape, Bradley found himself working closer than ever with Jack. The former sergeant's insights were invaluable, helping to shape every aspect of the initiative. Jack became more than just a consultant. He became a leader, mentoring other veterans and helping to bridge the gap between the corporate world and military experience. The day the first group of veterans started their training program was one Bradley would never forget. Standing before them, he saw not just individuals in need of help, but a room full of potential, men and women who had served their country and were now ready to serve their communities in a different way. "Welcome," Bradley began, his voice thick with emotion. "What we're starting here today is more than just a job training program. It's a commitment from us to you and from you to yourselves. We believe in your potential, in the skills and dedication you've already proven in service to our country. Now, we're here to help you channel that into building the future you deserve." As he spoke, Bradley's eyes met Jack's. The former sergeant stood at the back of the room, a proud smile on his face. In that moment, Bradley felt a sense of fulfillment unlike anything he'd experienced in his years of corporate success. The program wasn't without its challenges. There were setbacks, moments of doubt, and hurdles that seemed insurmountable. But with each obstacle overcome, with each veteran who found not just a job but a career, Bradley's conviction grew stronger. Months turned into years, and the program expanded beyond Bradley's wildest dreams. What had started as a single company's initiative became a movement, with businesses across the country adopting similar models. Bradley found himself speaking at conferences, advising government committees, and working tirelessly to change the narrative around veteran employment. Through it all, Jack remained by his side, a constant reminder of why they had started this journey in the first place. The two men, once separated by circumstance and choice, now stood united in a common purpose. One evening, as they stood on the roof of the now thriving veteran center that had grown from that small shelter, Jack turned to Bradley. "You know, Stone," he said, his voice gruff with emotion, "when I pulled you out of that firefight all those years ago, I never imagined it would lead to this." Bradley nodded, looking out over the city, a city that now felt like a landscape of possibility rather than a battlefield of corporate conquest. "Neither did I, Jack. But I'm grateful every day that it did." As the sun set over the skyline, painting the sky in hues of orange and gold, Bradley Stone realized that he had found something far more valuable than the wealth and status he had once pursued so relentlessly. He had found purpose, redemption, and a way to honor the sacrifice of those who had given so much for their country. The empire he had built hadn't crumbled. It had transformed into something far greater than he could have ever imagined. And as he stood there, shoulder to shoulder with the man who had once saved his life and had now helped him save his soul, Bradley knew that this was just the beginning. The road ahead was long, and there was still much work to be done. But for the first time in his life, Bradley Stone was truly, deeply satisfied. He had redefined success on his own terms, and in doing so, had found a way to make a lasting difference in the world. 5 years had passed since Bradley Stone's chance encounter with Jack Morrison had set them both on an unexpected path. The gleaming glass and steel building that now stood in the heart of the city was a far cry from the rundown shelter where they had reconnected. Stone Morrison Veterans Center read the sign above the entrance, a testament to the partnership that had changed countless lives, including their own. Inside, the lobby bustled with activity. Veterans of all ages moved purposefully through the space, some heading to job training sessions, others to counseling appointments or mentor meetings. The walls were adorned with success stories, photographs of smiling veterans in caps and gowns, in business attire, and in the uniforms of their new careers. Bradley stood by the window of his office, watching the scene below. His hair had grayed at the temples, and lines of experience etched his face, but his eyes sparkled with a vitality that had been missing in his corporate days. A knock at the door pulled him from his reverie. "Come in," he called, turning to see Jack enter the room. The years had been kind to Jack. Regular meals, proper medical care, and a renewed sense of purpose had worked wonders. Though he still walked with a slight limp, a remnant of their shared past, there was a strength in his bearing that spoke of resilience and hope. "Ready for the big day?" Jack asked, a grin playing at the corners of his mouth. Bradley nodded, straightening his tie, no longer the power suits of his past, but a simple, elegant outfit that spoke of quiet confidence rather than ostentation. "As ready as I'll ever be." "You? Born ready," Jack quipped, the easy banter between them a reflection of the deep friendship they had forged. Today marked the official launch of their nationwide initiative. What had started as a single company's program had grown into a movement, with businesses and organizations across the country adopting their model. The Stone Morrison Initiative was set to become a federally supported program, ensuring that veterans in every state would have access to the resources and opportunities they needed to thrive in civilian life. As they made their way to the auditorium, Bradley marveled at how far they had come. The journey hadn't been easy. There had been setbacks, moments of doubt, and hurdles that had seemed insurmountable. But with each challenge overcome, with each life changed, their resolve had only grown stronger. The auditorium was packed. Veterans, business leaders, politicians, and media had all gathered for this momentous occasion. As Bradley took the stage, with Jack by his side, a hush fell over the crowd. 5 years ago, Bradley began, his voice steady and clear, "I stood before a small group of veterans and made a promise. A promise not just to provide jobs, but to create a future where every veteran has the opportunity to thrive, to use their unique skills and experiences to build meaningful careers and fulfilling lives." He paused, his eyes scanning the audience. "Today, I stand before you not to say that we fulfilled that promise, because our work is far from over, but to reaffirm our commitment to it, and to invite all of you to join us in this mission." As Bradley spoke, outlining the successes of their program and the plans for its nationwide expansion, he could see the impact of their work reflected in the faces before him. There were tears in the eyes of veterans who had found new purpose, pride in the expressions of employers who had discovered the value of hiring those who had served, and determination in the gazes of policymakers ready to effect change on a larger scale. When Jack stepped up to the microphone, his words were few but powerful. "I've seen the best and worst of humanity," he said, his voice gruff with emotion. "I've known the depths of despair and the heights of hope. And I can tell you this, what we're doing here, it's not just about jobs. It's about restoring dignity, about honoring sacrifice, about building a society that truly values those who have given so much." As the applause thundered through the auditorium, Bradley and Jack shared a look of quiet understanding. They had come so far from that day in the café, from the battlefields of their youth, from the divergent paths that had led them to this moment. The press conference that followed was a whirlwind of questions, handshakes, and congratulations. But through it all, Bradley found his mind drifting to the individuals whose lives had been changed, the veteran who now ran her own successful tech startup, the former soldier who had become a respected teacher, the combat medic who is now saving lives in a different kind of frontline as an ER doctor. As the day wound down, Bradley and Jack found themselves back in Bradley's office, looking out over the city as the sun began to set. The skyline that had once represented Bradley's conquered territory now stood as a landscape of possibility, each building a potential partner, each street a path to a better future for those who had served. "You know, Stone," Jack said, breaking the comfortable silence. "When I pulled you out of that firefight all those years ago, I never imagined we'd end up here." Bradley chuckled, shaking his head. "Life has a funny way of coming full circle, doesn't it? You saved my life then, and in a way, you've saved it again." Jack raised an eyebrow. "How do you figure?" "You reminded me of who I really was," Bradley said softly. "Of who I could be. You gave me a purpose beyond just accumulating wealth and power." Jack nodded, understanding in his eyes. "And you," he said, "you've given so many of us a second chance. A new beginning." As they stood there, watching the city come alive with lights as darkness fell, Bradley felt a profound sense of peace. The empire he had once built hadn't crumbled. It had transformed into something far greater than he could have ever imagined. And the man he had become in the process, the lives he had touched, the change he had set in motion, that was a legacy worth far more than any fortune. "A new beginning," Bradley repeated, the words feeling right. "For all of us." The Stone Morrison Veterans Center stood as a beacon of hope in the heart of the city, a symbol of what could be accomplished when compassion met action, when past debts became future opportunities. And as Bradley and Jack looked out over the world they had helped to change, they knew that this was not an ending, but truly a new beginning for them, for the veterans they served, and for society learning to honor its heroes not just with words, but with meaningful action. The journey ahead was long, the work far from over. But with each life changed, with each veteran who found new purpose, the ripples of their efforts spread further, touching lives in ways they might never fully know. And in that ongoing mission, in the daily victories and challenges, Bradley Stone and Jack Morrison had found something precious: redemption, purpose, and a friendship that had withstood the tests of time and circumstance. As night fell over the city, the lights of the Stone Morrison Veterans Center shone bright, a promise and a challenge to all who saw it. A reminder that every ending can be a new beginning, and that it's never too late to redefine what truly matters in life.
Disclaimer: this channel does not support or tolerate any form of discrimination, racism, prejudice, or violation of human rights. The stories presented here are original and created by the author with the aim of promoting reflection, awareness, and dialogue. All content is developed with respect for diversity and the dignity of all people.